Hi everyone, welcome to Bashit. Previously, my channel was known as ThighsApp, and recently I decided to rebrand the channel to Bashit. There are a couple of reasons for that, and I will get into it in a later video perhaps. But for today, welcome to Bashit, and today we will talk about systems design. I know previously we spoke a little bit in depth about what a distributed system is, what is latency versus throughput in some of my earlier videos, but I wanted to start afresh from step one. And that means that I'll give you a good understanding of what systems design means, where systems design will be probably applicable, some common terms that we will dive into in the next few videos, as well as for a starting point for you to start learning some resources that you can dive into in your own time to start learning about systems design. The reason I'm doing this video is because oftentimes when I was browsing the net and preparing for different interviews, I found that the content was kind of scattered. It gave me a really hard time in learning about systems design, and I honestly wish there was some one resource I could go to point me in the right direction, especially for a beginner like myself. So without further ado, let's get into what systems design means. So systems design is a very broad term, and a system can mean anything from hardware to software. So in this, I am a software delivery manager, solutions architect, so therefore we'll be talking about the software system design and what that entails. Systems design is pretty much designing an application or architecting it from end to end, so from the front end, the middleware, and the back end, and how all these three pieces are interconnected with each other. So simplistically, usually for any application there are only three tiers. Tier 1, the front end, middleware, which is the business logic, and then you have the back end, which are the databases. But there are applications that use multiple tiers. We call them n-tier architecture. But either way, all of these n-tier or three-tier architecture uses very similar principles, and you need to understand some basic concepts to be able to read and understand the material that you have in front of you. So some examples of system design would be, for example, design Dropbox or design Twitter, design how Facebook works, design how a messenger works. So these are some like common question types or common use cases that we will try and tackle in the next few episodes. So before we begin talking about the resources, I wanted to talk about some of the concepts that you will encounter while reading newspaper articles or any material in system design. So some of them include distributed systems. So before, if you know, monolithic is like all the entire application used to be in one server. Now, given like the nature of the services and the applications we have, it has become more distributed in the sense that there are many servers trying to tackle different requests. So now that you have many different servers, the servers need to learn to talk to each other in some way. And that happens usually through APIs. So the first term for you to know would be distributed systems. Then it's servers, which is like the web tier, databases, then APIs. What does API mean? What are databases or the types of databases available? When do we apply what type of database in what kind of scenario? What are servers and what type of servers do we use, or how can we spin up servers faster? Then the third one is performance versus scalability, and horizontal versus vertical scaling. So to understand the differences in the use cases for each. Then you also need to know about load balancers, layer 4 versus layer 7 load balancers, caching, cache eviction policies, then content delivery network, stateful versus stateless, messaging queues, logging metrics, how metrics are done, why metrics are important, what type of metrics should we be looking for in a distributed system, replication, then how to make any system scalable and then also fault tolerant, the CAP theorem, latency versus throughput, availability versus reliability, DNS, which stands for domain name service, and the applications for DNS, like how when you enter google.com, how do you get a response, proxies and reverse proxies. So these are some of the terms that I will try and tackle in the next few videos. And in terms of the resources, I wanted to talk about a couple of them. So when I was learning system design, Like I've mentioned, I really struggle to find coherent content that's very understandable for a beginner. So to give you some background, my background is actually not in computer science. I started with political science and I've been working in the tech industry for the past 6 years. So I had to really spend my spare time in developing myself and finding resources that I find useful to upskill my skill sets to be able to do my job. So these are some of the resources that really helped me build my profile and portfolio in systems design and helped me get into the mindset of solving any kind of business problem, decomposing it into smaller parts, and designing like a technical architecture of providing a solution. So the first resource I really want to talk about is System Design Interview by Alex Zhu. So I came across this book like a few years into my career, but what this book did was it really helped me have a very thorough understanding about the concepts that I just mentioned earlier, such as latency versus throughput. What is the CAP theorem? So it starts from very basics, and you can really build up into applying these concepts in case studies. So the ways I have used this book is there are chapters that go through the basics, but there are also some like deep dive areas that helped me gain like a better understanding. One example would be like the DNS, like how does the DNS work? So it starts with a very simple 3-tier architecture, kind of takes that and makes it complex and adds layers and after layers. And that really helps you understand the content and remember it a bit better. So I would definitely start with the System Design Interview by Alex Zhu. There are some places online you can find the free PDF. I will link those in the comment section below. Another resource that was very helpful in my interview preparation is educative.io. So if you go into educative.io, there is this system design course that you can take. It's called Grokking the System Design Interview. So that is a great starter for learning how applications work. Like I wouldn't spend too much time in understanding the basics through the educative.io course, but I would like to emphasize that you focus on the application part, like design Dropbox or design Facebook Messenger. So it doesn't explain how to approach a question, but it gives you all the answers. So once you're familiar through the earlier resource in talking about some of the bigger concepts and you understand them and you familiarize yourself, the Grokking the System Design Interview can then help you deep dive into some of those areas. Oh, another thing the System Design Interview book by Alex Zhu does a very good job of is that it helps you understand how to answer these questions in an interview, like during a 45 or an hour-long interview, like what the approach should be, what step 1, step 2. So that was very useful. And then you can take that and apply it in the systems design, Grokking the Systems Design Interview to have a better understanding. So now in Grokking the System Design Interview, there is one part about the estimation, like back of the envelope estimation, such as if you have 100 million users, how much database storage capacity would you need? So I would say, like, if you are learning and you're a beginner, that you skip those back of the envelope estimation, because you can always get back into it and later learn about just doing some simple basic calculations on the spot. But if you're like a beginner, I would just go into understanding the bigger components, like a pub/sub architecture and a bunch of other concepts that they talk about before you get into the back of the envelope calculations. The third one, once you're very familiar, you can design a few systems, such as you can build Twitter, you can build Dropbox, Facebook, like the basic ones. Then I would go into like another primer that they have online. Many of you are probably familiar with it. It's called the GitHub, the System Design Primer. So I will again have the link below. So this, again, it's not a book where you can read and understand what each one is, but it works great as right before, like a couple days before the interview, you want to review something. It can be your go-to. So the primer, again, goes through all the concepts, but some of the concepts it would deep dive, such as like load balancing, layer 4 versus layer 7, when to use each one can be quite useful. So in terms of content, it can be quite heavy, but at the same time, it will give you a good review source. There are again systems you can design. Most of them overlap with the other resources I've mentioned. But yes, third, you should check that out right before, like a week or so before the interview. And right before the interview, I would suggest that you look at like a more modern system. I found this great Medium article. It talks about how Deliveroo, like any food delivery network, works, which can be a pretty common question given that there are so many like food delivery networks available nowadays. So that can be pretty good because what it does, it really breaks down the problem and explains like how the search works and then how all the different components and the different players are, what their functions are and how they interconnect with each other. So as a review, I would suggest that you go through the Medium article. So these are my 4 suggestions. I hope you have a good start to learning about system design, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.